The fire truck fiasco. It all started when I parked my vintage fire truck in my driveway. That simple act set off a suburban firestorm in the manicured lawns of Willow Creek, a neighborhood so pristine it could have been ripped from a real estate brochure. I'm Jack, a 52-year-old fire safety inspector with a soft spot for old fire engines. I never thought my passion for history would make me the neighborhood's most wanted man. Still, when the Homeowners Association, HOA, president decided to fine me into oblivion, she didn't realize she was lighting a match near her powder keg. My love for fire trucks goes back to my dad, a firefighter in the 80s. I can still see him pulling into our driveway after a long shift, his face smudged with soot but always cracking a tired grin. Those trucks weren't just machines. They were symbols of saving lives, of showing up when the world was burning. So when I found a 1985 fire truck for sale, faded red paint, chrome bumpers scarred from years of service, I had to have it. It wasn't just a purchase. It was a piece of my dad's legacy, a way to keep his stories alive. I bought my house in Willow Creek 3 months before the trouble started. The neighborhood screamed conformity. Every lawn trimmed to the same length, every mailbox perfectly aligned, every house painted in shades like serene taupe or obedient gray. It was the kind of place where individuality was a dirty word, and I should have known my fire truck would stick out like a sore thumb. But I wasn't trying to start a war. I just wanted to restore the truck and maybe show it off at a couple of car shows. Simple, right? Wrong. 3 weeks after moving in, I backed the truck into my driveway and heard the hum of an approaching golf cart. Through my side mirror, I saw a woman step out of a cart so fancy it probably cost more than my first car. She had a blonde bob cut with surgical precision, clothes that screamed, "I judge your shrubbery," and a clipboard that looked like it could double as a guillotine. This was Margaret Hensley, president of the Willow Creek HOA, and she was about to make my life a suburban nightmare. "Excuse me," she called, her voice dripping with the kind of authority that expects obedience. "Are you the new owner of this property?" I introduced myself, trying to be neighborly, but her smile was colder than a January wind. "I'm Margaret Hensley, HOA president. Welcome to Willow Creek." Then she eyed my fire truck like it had just spat on her grandmother's grave. "Someone in fire safety should know better than to park a junkyard relic in their driveway," she said, her tone sweet but venomous. That's when I realized this wasn't a casual visit. Margaret had done her homework. She knew my job, probably my schedule, maybe even my shoe size. This was a calculated strike. "I've had complaints," she continued, snapping photos of my truck like a detective at a crime scene. "People invest in this community for standards," I explained. It was a restoration project, temporary, but she wasn't listening. She scribbled on her clipboard, muttering about property values, and promised to review the covenants. As she drove off, I knew I just stepped into a war I hadn't signed up for. 3 days later, the first shot was fired. I came home to find an envelope from the HOA wedged in my door like a ransom note. Inside was a notice of violation fining me $300 for parking an oversized commercial vehicle in my driveway. 7 days to remove it or face more penalties. Margaret's signature was sharp, like she'd stabbed the paper. I was livid. $300 for a legally registered vehicle? I wanted to fire off a scathing email, but years of dealing with fire codes taught me emotions don't win battles. So I did what I do best. I researched. For 3 hours, I dug through zoning laws, HOA bylaws, and city codes older than my truck. Then I found it. My fire truck was registered as a personal vehicle, not commercial. Margaret's fine was built on a house of cards. The response I sent was polite but firm, citing regulations and attaching registration papers. I requested that the fine be rescinded immediately. 2 days later, Margaret called. "We need an emergency HOA meeting to discuss your situation," she said, her voice calm but sharp, like a knife being sharpened. She didn't sound defeated, she sounded like she was already planning her next move. The meeting was held in the community center, a sterile room that smelled of carpet glue and regret. I arrived early, armed with a folder of documents like I was heading to trial. Margaret sat at the head of the table, her papers spread out like a general's battle plans. Beside her was Ellen, the HOA secretary, who seemed to vanish into the wallpaper whenever tension rose, and Tom, the treasurer, who looked like he'd rather be fishing. Residents trickled in, including my neighbor Paul, who gave me a nod that felt like sympathy, or maybe he knew something I didn't. Margaret opened with her usual spiel about community standards and property values, delivered with the conviction of a televangelist. Then she got to me. "We have a resident parking a commercial fire truck in clear violation of our covenants," she said, staring me down. I stood, introduced myself, and laid out my case. The truck was a personal vehicle, backed by municipal codes and registration papers. I passed out copies, explained the law simply, and watched Tom nod in relief. For a moment, I thought I'd won. Then Margaret pulled a move that hit like a sucker punch. "You're right about the truck," she said, smiling like she was handing me a trophy. "But while we're on compliance, I noticed you painted your fence last weekend without submitting a modification request." The room went silent. I touched up my fence same color, same paint, 2 hours of work, and it never crossed my mind to file paperwork. But Margaret wasn't just pointing out a violation. She was saying, "I see everything." While I'd been fighting over the truck, she'd been cataloging my every move. The truck was a distraction. This was her real attack. I argued the fence didn't need approval since I used identical materials, but the damage was done. Margaret had shown the room that she could find violations anywhere, anytime. The meeting ended with the truck fine dropped, but the fence issue was tabled for review. As people left, Paul whispered, "Be careful with her. She's got more tricks than a magician." I thought he was exaggerating. I was wrong. For 3 weeks, Margaret waged a campaign of petty harassment. One day, my lawn was too long. The next, too short. My trash can was 6 inches past the curb. My potted plant was aesthetic pollution. My car was parked too far left in my driveway. Each notice came with a $25 to $50 fine, all citing community standards. I started dreading my mailbox. Sleep became elusive. I'd hear footsteps at night, wondering if Margaret was patrolling. It wasn't enforcement, it was psychological warfare. I hit my breaking point after the 10th notice. Exhausted, I fired off an email I shouldn't have. "If you put half the energy into improving Willow Creek as you do measuring my driveway, this place might be a community instead of a prison." It felt good for about 10 seconds. The next morning, Paul caught me at my mailbox. "You sent her an email, didn't you?" he said. "She thrives on conflict. The angrier you get, the more she wins." He told me how Margaret had hounded him for 6 months over a too wide welcome mat, nearly driving him to sell his house. "She doesn't care about rules," he said. "She cares about control." Then, something shifted. One evening, while I was tinkering with my truck, Margaret pulled up in her golf cart. Instead of citing violations, she was chatty, almost smug. "I've upgraded my security lighting," she boasted, gesturing to her house, which glowed like a runway. "Motion sensors, accent lights around the fence, I installed it all myself." She bragged about her time as a building inspector, claiming she knew more than most electricians. Every alarm in my professional brain went off. As a fire safety inspector, I've seen too many electrical fires caused by overconfident amateurs. Outdoor lighting, improperly installed, is a disaster waiting to happen. I kept my tone neutral. "That's ambitious," I said. "Hope you're using weatherproof components. Moisture's a killer with electrical systems." She bristled. "I know weatherproofing," she snapped. "I've seen every kind of installation. I know what works." Her confidence was the kind that gets people hurt. I should have reported her then, but part of meth, part fed up with her fines, wanted to see how far her hubris would take her. So I started offering helpful advice whenever I saw her working on her lights. "Nice progress," I'd call out. "Hope you're using junction boxes rated for outdoor use." Or, "Those circuits need GFCI protection to prevent shocks." She'd dismiss me, doubling down on her expertise. It was like watching someone sprint toward a cliff, insisting they could fly. I also planted some fast-growing vines along our shared fence line, partly for aesthetics, partly to ease tension. They thrived in the humid air, covering the fence beautifully. Margaret, though, became obsessed with her lighting project, going out every evening with extension cords and tools, adding more lights, tweaking connections. It looked like a project spiraling out of control, but she was too proud to admit it. Paul stopped by one night while I was watering the vines. "You're playing with fire," he said, nodding toward Margaret's glowing fence. "I know she's a nightmare, but letting her dig her own grave? That's risky." I insisted I was just offering advice. She ignored it. "If she thinks she's smarter than fire safety experts, what can I do? Stop her from working on her property?" He didn't have an answer, but his worry stuck with me. I wrestled with my conscience. My job is to prevent disasters, not watch them unfold. I'd seen too many preventable fires: a single mom and her son losing everything to a faulty extension cord, a family standing barefoot outside their burning home. Each time, I'd think, One honest conversation could have stopped this. Now, I was watching Margaret Court's disaster, and I was complicit in my silence. The turning point came when she complained about moisture in her electrical connections. "It's those vines you planted," she snapped, holding a live wire like it was a garden hose. "They're making it too humid." I couldn't believe it. She was blaming my plants for her shoddy work. "If moisture's an issue," I said, "you might need better weatherproofing. There are products for wet locations." She scoffed. "I know what I'm doing. I just need to adjust for your plants." Her denial was breathtaking. That night, I watched her wrestle with a junction box that kept shorting out. She'd flip the breaker, tweak something, and try again, each failure making her more determined. My professional instincts screamed to intervene, but her stack of violation notices loomed in my mind. She'd built a wall between my duty and my compassion. I didn't want revenge. I wanted her to learn that confidence doesn't trump physics. At 11:17 p.m. on a Tuesday, her fence lit up the night. I was half asleep when a sharp pop jolted me awake, followed by crackling and the sound of electrical systems failing in sequence. From my window, I saw sparks cascading along Margaret's fence, small fires flaring where wires had given up. Motion sensors flickered wildly. Accent lights strobed like a bad nightclub. It was beautiful and terrifying, a textbook case of amateur electrical failure. I threw on clothes and ran outside. Half the neighborhood was already in the street, phones out, someone calling the fire department. Margaret stood in her yard, bathrobe and slippers, staring at her flaming masterpiece with a mix of shock and defiance. 3 fire trucks roared in ironic, given she'd fined me for parking one. The crew worked fast, shutting off power and dousing the flames before they spread. If the wind had been stronger, we could have lost houses. A police officer, Officer Daniels, took statements. Margaret pointed at me. "It's his vines," she insisted. "They caused moisture in my wiring." In her panic, she admitted to doing the electrical work herself, without permits or inspections. Daniels raised an eyebrow. "So you installed this without a licensed contractor?" he asked. Her flustered answers dug her deeper. Then Paul stepped up. "Officer, my security cameras caught everything," he said. We crowded around his tablet, watching weeks of footage. Margaret using residential extension cords outdoors, non-weatherproof junction boxes, connections failing repeatedly. It was a slow-motion disaster. Daniels turned to Margaret. "Ma'am, this is a serious safety hazard. Unpermitted work like this could have burned down the neighborhood." I realized I'd likely be assigned to inspect this incident officially. The irony wasn't lost on me. The next Saturday, the community center was packed for an emergency HOA meeting. Word of Margaret's fiasco had spread like wildfire, and residents wanted answers. Margaret arrived, clutching legal papers, her usual confidence replaced by a defensive hunch. Paul opened the meeting by projecting his footage, showing her dangerous work in stark detail. "This is the person who fined me $75 for a welcome mat 3 inches too wide," he said. "She spent more time measuring my doormat than learning electrical safety." The room erupted. Residents shared stories. Mrs. Carter, fined for wrong shade flowers. Mr. Evans, harassed for parking his work van. A young couple threatened over a swing set 6 inches out of place. Each tale painted Margaret as a tyrant wielding rules like weapons. Ellen, the quiet secretary, spoke up. HOA and city codes require permits and licensed contractors for electrical work. This footage shows clear violations. Tom, usually conflict-averse, moved to remove Margaret as president. The vote was unanimous. As the fire safety inspector, I had the final word. "This wasn't an accident," I said. "It was the predictable result of someone ignoring expert warnings." I offered advice weatherproofing, GFCI protection, but it was dismissed as criticism. Real experts know their limits. They ask for help. They follow safety protocols. Margaret thought authority equaled expertise. It doesn't. I looked at her, hoping for accountability. She just stared at the table. When she stood, I thought she'd apologize. Instead, she gathered her papers and walked out, silent, defeated but unrepentant. No, sorry, no acknowledgement of the danger she'd caused. As she left, Paul clapped my shoulder. "Guess we learned what happens when confidence outruns competence," he said. He was right, but I felt no victory. Watching her fence burn hadn't been satisfying, it was a gut punch. My job is to stop fires, not watch them start. Willow Creek returned to normal. A new HOA board was elected, focused on community, not control. My fire truck stayed in my driveway, slowly coming back to life under my wrench. Every glance at Margaret's charred fence reminded me that experience is a harsh teacher, especially when pride writes the lesson plan. She never apologized, but her silence spoke volumes. The neighborhood didn't need her regret, it needed her gone. That fire truck, once called an eyesore, became a symbol, not of rebellion, but of standing firm against petty tyranny. It reminded us that expertise matters, that safety isn't negotiable, and that sometimes, the worst fires are the ones fueled by ego. Margaret's downfall wasn't my doing, it was hers. She ignored every warning, and physics doesn't negotiate. What do you think? Have you ever faced someone who used power to bully rather than build? Or seen injustice burn itself out like Margaret's fence? Share your stories in the comments. I want to hear where you stand on dealing with bullies and standing up to unfair systems. Let's talk about it.